Now that we have created these walls and pillars, let's add some details. And first, I want to add some cutouts to the ceiling structure there. So it's a little bit more interesting when we do the isometric view. And right now we can start by shift right clicking here, adding a cursor there, maybe a little bit further away like this. And let's press Shift A and add the cube there. Now we can go into the edit mode. Let's press tab and scale this down so it kind of covers that bevel there. If we look closer and enable wireframe overlay, you can see how this cuts into the topology. And again, we don't want to go very near these edges there. So I think something like this will work just fine. And let's now press S and Y to scale this on the Y axis. So I want to do cutouts like this. And now let's rotate this a little bit, and I will select this back face, and let's look from the top a little bit and scale this further down on Y axis. So let's press S, Y, and scale this down like this. And we can now select these edges on the sides. So let's press 2 for edge select this one here and here in the back. And let's press Ctrl B and let's do a bevel there. So we can do 3 segments, but again, we don't want to go close to that edge right there. So maybe the smarter thing will be to do just 2 bevels here like this. So we are not hitting that edge there. And now we can tab out, shade is smooth, and shift click the ceiling structure there and press Ctrl- for that boolean and fix the stack by moving the boolean modifier above the bevel there. So we have nice cutout there. Let me switch off the wireframe overlay so we can see how this looks, and we can see a little bit of a shading issue there, but I don't think we can do much here apart from maybe modifying the bevel a little bit and make it smaller. So let's try to make the bevel a little bit smaller so it's not that prominent. And now we can duplicate this, and again we are going to use the power of these modifiers and the non-destructive workflow to quickly create more details just by adding 1 modifier. So select the boolean object and let's add array modifier, and we will change this from X. So let's set this to 0 and 1 and a 5 on the Y axis. So we are moving in this direction, and we can increase count to 3, and this way we created a nice consistent detail. And now if we go into the edit mode and maybe scale this on the Y axis, you can see how we can fill up the rest of the place and nicely and interactively create details like this just by using 2 modifiers. So I think this looks quite alright now, and I want to do this on the other side as well, here between these pillars. Maybe we can move this one a little bit to the side there. So let's select this object, go to the top view by pressing 7 on a numpad, and now I want to create a link duplicate here, so Alt D, and let's rotate this on the Z axis minus 90 degrees. So R, Z, and minus 90, and let's try to move it in place in a similar way as the other one, and let's reduce the count to 2. And as you remember, when you have a link duplicates, the modifiers aren't linked, so you can change how the modifier behaves and have the same linked duplicate mesh. Now we can shift click here and press Ctrl- once again, and again fix the stack, so move this above. And maybe here we can modify this even further by reducing the offset on that array modifier. So yeah, I think this looks fine. That's something I wanted to have here. And now we can add some more interest to those wall panels, to that tiling. If you look from the side here, I would like to have this middle part a little bit curved out here. I think that would make this a little bit more interesting. So let's select these wall panels, tab into edit mode, and we should have these front faces selected from the last time. If you don't have, just select these faces in the front by holding shift and clicking them. And now we can press Ctrl I to invert the selection and press H to hide those. We don't want to manipulate the other geometry. And now I want to press Ctrl R and add 4 cuts here. So we have a resulting 5 segments there, and right click to release. And now we will move this a little bit outwards in a way that we can create a slope easily. So first we can go to the face select by pressing 3, and by holding Alt and Shift we can select these loops here. And if you look from the side, we want to move them out here a little bit, but we want to do this on the other side as well. So the simple scale wouldn't help us much, but we can do scaling along normals. That's the Alt S shortcut. So if you press Alt S, you will see how they're moving along their normals, and that's exactly what we want to do. And we can hold Shift to make this movement a little bit more smooth in smaller increments, and let's scale them out like this. And now just Alt click right here, and let's press Alt S and finish the curve by pushing this out a tiny bit. And now if you press Alt H, we have exactly what we wanted. We created this curvature here. If you look from the side here, this is perfectly aligned. So while scaling, we didn't scale anything to the side. We scaled those faces only along their normals, and that's what you can do with the Alt S shortcut. And the last thing to do here is to add some details to those pillars as well. And I want to reuse the floor geometry a little bit. So let's select the room object, go into the edit mode, select the bottom plane, press Shift D to duplicate, P to separate. Now we can go into the edit mode. And first of all, let's scale this down. So let's select all and scale this plane down like this. And we can move it up. So let's rotate, and I want to move it up until here where the slope on the pillar is. So let's press G, Z and move this up. And now we can extrude this. And now we go out and let's try to create a cutout in those pillars here. So Shift click the wall structure here and Ctrl minus. And let's fix the stack by moving this above the bevel modifier. Again, we can collapse this so it's a little bit more tidy. And this is what we have here, but I think these cuts go a little bit too deep. So let's select this Boolean object, and we can interactively modify this in the edit mode. So let's go into the edit mode. And here we want to leave these two faces as they are here. We would just want to move these other ones. So let's toggle the X-ray, select this one here and here, and we can now toggle the X-ray back so we better see what we are doing. And we can again use that Alt S, that scaling along normals. And what they'll do, if you press Alt S, you will see these faces are now moving perfectly along normals, so we can interactively find the geometry that we want. And if you additionally enable wireframe overlay, we have now perfect control over the depth and the shape and the geometry of these cutouts. And I think something like this could work just fine. Yeah, we have no shading issues there, so I guess this will work. But now I want to take this detail a little bit further. So let's select this top face, and I want to duplicate this, and let's enable wireframe overlay once again. I want to duplicate this, so press Shift D, then Z, and move this up a little bit. And here we can extrude this, and you can see how we are already cutting into those pillars. So this is really interactive and quite fun sometimes. And now we can hover over this part here, press L. Let's look from the side, and now we can just press Shift D, Z, and we can hold Control for the grid increments. So we have a nice distance between them, nice consistent distance. And let's press Shift D once again, Z, and hold Control to snap this again like that. So this looks fine, I think, but here we are going a little bit too deep into the structure. So let's toggle the X-ray. Let's look from the side here, and we can select these faces. And again, we can use the Alt S, the scaling along normals. Let's toggle the X-ray back. And let's press Alt S and scale this down so we don't go too deep there. I think this works just fine. We didn't hit any of these edges here, and it's all nice and smooth. So as you can see, you can create all kinds of geometry, all kinds of objects, and cross-combine them with modifiers and use them as Boolean operators to create quite a complex geometry. If you imagine that you would need to create all of this just by directly editing the mesh, that would take quite a lot of time. And I can see some shading issue right here, but I suspect it has nothing to do with the shape of this new object we created, but rather when we move these two pillars in place, they're a little bit, the depth that they go into the wall is a little bit different than here. When we can have a look from the top, and if we look closer, this distance is a little bit different. So what we can do is just take this one here and push it a little bit inside until the problem disappears, like this. So as you can see, I'm not doing like perfect things here and throwing out numbers that would work perfectly. I want to show you how this is interactive, and when you see some shading issues and sometimes when your geometry breaks, you know how to fix that. You can see how I'm fixing that, where I look for the problems, whether it's normals or position of these booleans objects. So we will continue in this manner. I will want to keep this as interactive as possible, so you gain the skill of the problem solving for the geometry and objects like this. And before we move on to the next chapter, I want to do a very important thing here, the same as we did with the crates. I want to organize this a little bit because it's getting out of hand. We have a bunch of cube and plane objects. And of course, you could go and name each of these objects contextually, but sometimes it's hard to come up with names that fit the use of the object, especially when you're doing just Boolean got-out objects. So sometimes it's enough to just select these Boolean objects. Let's select these bounds. And we select the wall structure as last one, and let's just press Ctrl P and parent. So right now they're kind of hidden here, and we can just call this wall structure. We can take these objects and call these wall panels. And here we have walls. So right now this is a little bit better because we have all of these Boolean objects that are tightly bound to this object right here. So if you want to move this, for example, so it only makes sense that these are parented, and it helps you with the outliner structure as well. You don't have to name all of these objects, just the parent objects, and that again makes things a little bit more easier and quicker for you. So yeah, these are the walls and the pillars for you, and we can move on to the next part.